Hey folks, welcome. If you've managed to find this video, you're one of my massive crowd of YouTube followers, which at the moment totals 4. So welcome. I'm going to take you through my ownership experience and impressions of my latest bike. It's the GasGas EC300 TPI. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm doing this on one single camera, and this has to be done in one take. If I make any mistakes along the way, I hope you'll forgive me. I'm going to try and give you as honest a review as I can. Just a little bit about me and the kind of riding I do. I'm 53 years old, weigh 90 kilograms. I love enduro, the harder the better, but I'm certainly no pro. I do enter the odd race here and there for fun, and when I do, I try to be at least as competitive as a 53-year-old fart like me can be. So the bike is important and the equipment needs to be up to the task. Just in terms of riding, been riding about 15 years now, enduro. Love it like all you do if you found this video. My history in bikes generally been with the KTM brand. I've had 8 KTM 300s, including a TPI bike. I got one of the first TPIs, a 2018 TPI. That was a KTM 300 XEW. I have nothing bad to say about those bikes. I loved every single KTM 300 I had. Not one of them ever let me down. They are rock solid, beautiful bikes. But there's been a lot of interest in these bikes. Obviously, this is the first GasGas under the KTM ownership of the brand. They were recently launched into South Africa, and you're starting to see more and more of them about. But you might be wondering, if I was so happy with the KTM brand, then why would I change colors, get a red bike instead of the orange one? And that's a pretty interesting story, actually. I was in the market for a new bike. I had a look at the KTM, rode one, the 2021, did the same thing on a Husky, and then quite by chance I got offered the opportunity to test ride one of these on a weekend ride. And frankly, I was blown away. It was the first bike I'd ever sort of swung a leg over where everything felt right. The riding position felt good, the bike was comfortable, and I could see that I'd have to do very little to it to sort of customize it for my preferences and the way I like to ride. There's also a cost saving in these bikes. That cost saving does come at the expense of some of the kit, but I'll touch on some of that as well, and why I still think it's worth the compromise. Essentially, the bike is stock. It's as it came from the factory. The only changes I've made are to do with protective gear, the kind that you would normally use on an enduro bike. I'll touch on that. But let me perhaps kick off with talking about some of the things I get asked about most on this. And those are the changes where it's different from the KTM parent company bike. And honestly, most often asked question is Brake and clutch, and I'm talking about the hydraulics here, essentially your pads. The clutch itself is the same as you'd find on the KTM brand, but the levers and the hydraulics and so on are Brake brand. Let's do them individually. Front brake, Brake, I absolutely love it. Obviously I knew the Brembo well from the KTM, but I really like the feel in this. It's plenty powerful. You can lock up that wheel as and when you need it. It seems to have a bigger range of feel though, and you can really feel that bite point. And I love that, particularly steep downhills when you're on the brakes a bit, and just before you lock that tire, you can feel it sort of nipping up, and you can just release it and keep rolling. So really like that. That's is certainly not a downside for me. And if it is a cost saving, well, it certainly hasn't hurt the performance any. Rear brake, not so successful. It seems to be very sensitive to adjustment. The first time I rode it, I felt the pedal was a little low. I adjusted it up, and then unfortunately went straight into a race without testing and ended up seizing the back caliper, which was a frustration and cost me some time and made me rather grumpy. I've subsequently readjusted that and never had a problem, but it's interesting to note that a friend of mine who bought a bike exactly the same as this one after riding mine had the exact same problem. As I say, it all works fine now, but it does seem to me it's very sensitive on adjustment as to where that lever is. So that's something you might want to bear in mind and just test a few times before you take it into a race situation. The clutch is great. It feels much like the Brembo clutch does, perhaps also a bit more feel in the mid bite point area. It is, I would say, a tiny bit stiffer than the Brembo that I wasn't expecting. Having said that, it's certainly not stiff, and it's not a problem from a riding perspective. The levers themselves, I feel, are perhaps a little too far forward, even when you adjust them back to their, as far back as they can go on your click adjustment over here. I would prefer them slightly closer in, but to be honest, I've gotten used to it now, and I've changed the position of the levers slightly to make it more comfortable for me. Trouble getting these levers in South Africa at the moment. I'm waiting for stock to come in. You can't fit anything that fits to a Brembo into these perch points. So that's a consideration. As soon as I have spares of these, I'm going to have a crack at bending this one back slightly so it's slightly more comfortable. I tend to use one finger on the clutch and one on the brake. So that's just a difference in feel. Takes a little bit of getting used to, but I must say I have no complaints in that regard at the moment. I'm often asked about the power and how the motor feels, and to be honest, well, it's a KTM 300 motor, right? So you kind of know what that feels like if you've ridden a KTM, and at least that was my initial expectation. But in practice, the bike felt quite different. When I first got it, I rode it immediately, and despite the feel of the bike, it feels a little bit more compact, a little bit more supple than a KTM. I haven't done too much time on Husqvarna, so I can't make too much of a comparison. It's certainly, compact, wieldy, chuckable is a good word to describe it. I loved all of those things about it, but from a motor perspective, it actually felt a bit more like a trumped up 250 rather than a 300. Insofar it was reasonably thin on power at the bottom and pretty wild at the top. And make no mistake, when it got wild, it got wild. There's plenty of power there. It came stock with a 1450 sprocket setup. I rode it like that for the first month. Really liked it for its long legs and its ability to cruise and nice flowy conditions. It was great for that. But in the more technical stuff I do, it felt a little long geared, so I changed to the 13 sprocket in the front, which actually came with the bike. It had an option of both. I started on the 14, went to the 13, and essentially took it back to what I was used to running on a KTM, right, 1350. Immediately the bike felt better in technical stuff. It made a huge difference in terms of climbing, loose conditions where traction's at a premium. I found I could kick it into second and hold that gear without having to clutch it too much. So definitely for more technical riding, 1350 feels right to me on this at the moment. But if I was entering an event that was maybe a bit faster, then maybe I'd put that 14 back on. The bike feels lovely with it on in fast conditions. One of the other areas they save a bit of money is on the wheels. So this bike, you'll notice this is on black wheels. It actually comes standard with just aluminium anodized wheels. Essentially the same thing as you would find on a KTM, but this wasn't a problem to me because I had a spare set of wheels for my KTM 300, which I just swapped over and bolted in here. So my stock wheels that the bike came with are sitting gathering dust and no mileage, and will be in great nick when it comes to selling the bike. And just in terms of the wheels front and back, I've got Moose's front and back. I'm running Michelin mediums. I think they're a great tire for longevity and for all-round conditions. That's an enduro medium. It's the fatty on the front. It's the 100/90. For race conditions, I'd put something a bit softer on the back, maybe a Metzeler 6 days or something along those lines. But for good mileage and reasonably good traction, these work absolutely fine. The bike itself is absolutely stock. I'm 90 kilograms. I did change springs though. I've put springs in here for 95 to 105 kilogram rider. I think it's the most important thing you can do on your enduro bike is to get it sprung right for you. That's slightly in the heavy range for me, but once you kit it up with everything else, it feels right for this bike. And I'm happy with the balance on the springs. I have done a mod to the fork. I'll talk about that in another video because I really want to talk about the bike today in terms of how it was in its stock setup when I got the bike. But just to talk about suspension for a moment, this is the first enduro bike with the linkage that I'm riding. I had all those fears about will it hook on things. The simple answer is yes, sometimes it does. But once you get used to it, it doesn't happen too much. This is the X-Ball fork. I was familiar with it. My 2018s had it. But I will say there was a definite improvement between the 2018 on my KTM and this fork in terms of feel and the damping. And I know they had made some changes internally, and I certainly felt that. I would say the stock setup for general weekend warrior riding, having fun with your mates, long rides out in the countryside, probably more on the technical side of or scale of riding, I think the setup is absolutely fine. And I only think if you want to get up into competition that you might need to think about the forks, which I'll discuss in another video for you. Just in terms of protection, things I added to the bike, I'll just start up front with the handguards. These are Enduro Engineering. I had the choice of putting another brand on when I bought the bike, but frankly these were cheaper and I love them. They are just rock solid. They're incredibly tough, simple to bolt on and bolt off. And yeah, I've had them on other bikes and I can't say a bad word about them. They are extremely tough and take a real hammering. Protection for the bike, I'm currently running the Hyde exhaust, belly pan and linkage protection system here. It's all one piece. I've run these Hydes on all my bikes. I've generally been very happy with them. They do have one or two drawbacks, but certainly as a minimum for protection, I put this on. Having said that, I'm about to change this. And I'll talk more about that in another video as well. The reason for the change is that I don't think this is actually robust or thick enough. I did an oil change the other day and actually found a couple of dents that I put into the bottom of the frame from impacts. So I think you need a bit more protection down there. It certainly doesn't do a good job of protecting the linkage. This is just an extension of the stock one they used to use on the XCW KTM, I think. And this isn't beefy enough and it isn't big enough. So the system I'm going to put in here will take care of that. The other thing about these is the pipe will dent. In fact, there's plenty of dents in this pipe, you just can't see it and it gets hidden by the cover. So that's something that you need to think about as well. And on top of that, if you've ever ridden this setup in really muddy conditions, you will know that it just stores mud, rubbish, grass inside. It acts like a big basket. It contributes tremendously to the weight in a wet race, and I just want to get away from that. I want an easily clean, quick to inspect system in place. So I'm going to go with a belly pad and a carbon exhaust cover. But as I said, I'll talk a bit more about that in future. Tug straps front and back. I can't tell you what brand, but obviously very necessary for an enduro bike. If you don't have one of these on the front of your bike, don't expect your mates to pull you up that impossible step up. Up front, I'm running full wraparound fork guards. These are important. I think manufacturers these days, and it really doesn't matter which one you're buying, it's really a huge failure on their part to not have a complete wraparound fork guard. The potential of damage to the back, scratches and so on is not only hugely expensive, but it's very frustrating. And I think as a minimum, you should get that full wraparound fork guard. These were off my KTM, simply bolted straight on. I'm also running for the foot protectors down at the bottom. I'm running Hyde. It's a thick black plastic. It is my preferred protection down there. I like the plastic because it slides rather than hooks. And the same applies to the left where the brace disc guard is. It's also the plastic one. And the reason I far prefer that is, unlike the sort of shark fin type arrangement, it doesn't hook, it doesn't stick, it doesn't flick you off when you hit something. It tends to bend or move a bit. I've never ever damaged the disc using this system. And most importantly, it wraps around and covers the caliper. I've had quite a few mates who've had their rides destroyed because they've taken a big smack on that caliper. And enduro bikes are no fun to ride with no front brakes. So that's my preference over there. Bigger exhaust than the 21 bikes. It is out here and it can be vulnerable. You can buy a full carbon protector for this that's front to back. To be honest, in South Africa, that's about $2.5 grand. It looks sexy, but I don't think it's necessary. I've got a simple piece of carbon covering the back here, which clips on and secured by a couple of zip ties. And I think this is the area that you really need to protect. I think we tend to put far too much on our bikes from a bulk perspective. So that's certainly something that's worth doing. I'm running carbon covers on the clutch and on the alternator on the other side. They look Trek. The bike came with it in the deal I managed to negotiate with the dealership. Don't put these on. They serve a purpose, they look good, and they will offer some protection, but honestly they're not thick enough, and the carbon tends to pull through on the bolts here, which makes it really tough to get the right sort of torque settings on the bike's covers underneath. Polysport do a beautiful plastic cover for both sides at reasonable money, and a couple of my mates are running those, and I highly recommend that you do the same. You can't see them there, but there's a radiator braces in here. These are Enduro Engineering, I believe, and also very solid and dependable. And the bike, I did have a fan spec with it. I also added a map switch. The value of these things is debatable. A lot of people will tell you they can't really feel the difference. I will tell you that there's definitely a difference. It is, however, quite subtle. And I tend to run it in the soft map all the time because this motor is plenty powerful. So it has the capacity to spin up the rear if you're not careful. I run it in a slightly softer map to manage that. All round, I've been really pleased with the bike. It's not let me down in any situations. It took a little while to get used to from a feel perspective. Those issues that I was not happy with, I have changed. The other thing I actually just wanted to tell you, this is a stock seat. It's surprisingly grippy for a smooth seat. I think it looks beautiful, but it's not particularly strong, and you can really see I've got a few nicks and scratches on it from rocks, and it's starting to split underneath. And given that this bike has done sort of 32-33 hours, I don't think that's a good deal. So I've got another one on order, custom built for this, that will match the color scheme, but I've gone for something a lot tougher in terms of the material itself. The next time I talk to you, I'm going to talk to you about the forks and the changes I've made there and the reasons why I've made those changes. But I think that'll do for now. I just wanted to put this out there for folks who are maybe in the market for a new bike, hadn't yet thought about the Gas. I know it's a new brand to South Africa, but given it's backed by KTM and you can get 90% of the components of this bike at a KTM dealership, I thought that would help it tremendously in terms of spares. Also, resale value I think will be okay. We know the KTMs tend to hold their resale value here pretty well. I certainly have not regretted this decision at all. I love this bike, the feel of it, and I love the fact that it's maybe a little bit different to something I've ridden before. After 300s, maybe it was time for a change, right? So I think that's it for now. I'll come back to you with a video with what's next. It's going to be a bit of a